Okay, this video is called World War I. That's always a tongue twister for me, but you've gotten a little bit of it in the 6th grade, so we're not going to spend a ton of time on it, studying it this year, but we are going to touch on kind of the basics of it and hope that you can bring in some of those 6th grade learning items from my wife, I might add. So I would hope that you remember some of it. But anyway, so World War I. All right, June 28th, 1914, a Serbian man assassinated, so he shot and killed the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary. So Archduke Franz Ferdinand was next in line to control Austria-Hungary, and a Serbian man shot him. Then Austria declared war on Serbia. So literally shooting one man who was supposed to be on the throne in a country basically sparked World War I. A bunch of other nations joined in, and the war was underway. All right, so the European countries divided into two opposing groups. So they fought on two sides. You had the Central Powers, Austria-Hungary, Germany, the Ottoman Empire, Bulgaria. Most of our conflict was with Germany. Much of the conflict was with Germany. And then the Allied powers, Serbia, Russia, France, Great Britain, and Italy. All right, so the assassination of the Archduke started the war, but there were many other kind of underlying causes, contributing factors that we're not necessarily going to talk about, like imperialism, nationalism, all this stuff there. But you do need to know how it started and kind of on what sides or what. We joined in kind of on the Allied power side, but we're really focused mainly on Germany, as they're the ones that kind of push our patience, if you will. So World War I, soldiers fought a new type of war called trench warfare. They would dig these huge trenches in the ground, and they would shoot guns at each other, and then they would advance the trenches. And that was kind of the goal, and it was hugely, hugely destructive because they had all these new types of modernized weapons, automatic machine guns and stuff, so millions of people died during this war. You also had introduction of planes and submarines into modern warfare. German U-subs, or submarines, were all used, and so now we got to talk about how does America get into the war. So when the war started, President Woodrow Wilson implemented a policy of neutrality, which meant basically that the U.S. refused to take any side of the war. They weren't saying either side. They were just going to stay out of it and stay neutral. All right, so in 1914, which is the same time they declared neutrality, a German U-sub, or a submarine, sank a British ship that killed 128 Americans. All right, so that obviously made America incredibly mad, but the U.S. chose to stay neutral for the time being. There's a great movie called I think it's called U-571, which is about submarines. It's a very good movie. I recommend it. I saw it in theaters. Very good. Long time ago, though. All right. So America Goes to War continued. All right, so we had that incident where the German U-sub shot down a British ship which had Americans on it. 128 Americans died. President Woodrow Wilson wins re-election in 1916. He ran on the platform of he kept us out of the war. Vote for him. He's a Democrat. So now we have a new incident. All right, the British intercept a telegram sent by a guy named Arthur Zimmerman, the Zimmerman telegram. The German foreign minister at the time, Arthur Zimmerman was a German foreign minister. The telegram said if Mexico would help Germany in this war, then Germany would help Mexico get back Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. All right. Obviously, those were lands that were now owned by us, the United States. So the British gave the telegram to the United States, and Americans were furious. But we stayed out of the war. Then, in March of 1917, some German submarines sank 3 American ships, and eventually America declared war on April 2nd, 1917. So it took basically 3 pretty major incidences to get America in the war, because America knew what war was like. They really just got out of the Civil War, fought a couple little wars along the way, and they didn't want to be in one of these world wars. So the war begins, and to get American soldiers, the government institutes the draft, where people sign up, they draw a number out, if your number's called, you join the military, because we only had, I think I read a number, it was like 200,000 American men in the army at this time, so we didn't have a huge army. And to raise money, we sold war bonds, where Americans bought these bonds, and the government would pay them back. That's how the government was able to raise money for the war. And then on November 11th, well, let me just say, we fight the war. All right, we're not going to talk about the war that much, so we fight the war. But on November 11th, 1918, at 11 a.m., which is known as the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, all right, Germany stopped fighting. It was called an armistice, ceased fighting. So Germany was done fighting. The war was over. All countries met, and they created the Treaty of Versailles, which made Germany take full responsibility for the war, and they had to pay $33 billion in destruction damages for what they had caused in the war and all the destruction they had done. So Germany obviously was incredibly upset by this treaty. They struggled economically, they resented the treaty, and this kind of planted the seeds and the foundation for World War II. So World War I is over, all right? U.S., it's, early 19-teens, 1918, somewhere in there, so we're looking at the 1920s. But that's where we're going to take off. But during the war, back in America, so while the war was going on, northern factories needed workers, and African Americans were there to fill those needs. All right, so they moved from the South up into the North to work in these factories and definitely escape discrimination as well. And this movement of this shift of African Americans from the South to the North was called the Great Migration. And they moved there to fill jobs that had been vacated by soldiers who went to fight in the war. Women also began to take on men's jobs because those men were serving in the military. But when many of the workers returned, they were kind of expecting to get a pay increase because they needed to make some money. And when that pay increase didn't come, a lot of workers went on strike, and you had a lot of labor disputes and a lot of discussion around labor and what it should look like and wages and all that stuff, and living conditions continued. And there was also an increase in racial tension and violence. So this really brings us right up to the late 19-teens, early 1920s, into a period known as the Roaring Twenties, which we're going to talk about when we track back in. So this is the video entitled World War I.